I tell you what,
It's
not like the olden days. I'm Jake.
I'm Rosie.
And this is our podcast on Dogtanian and the Three Muskehounds, which was originally produced in Spain in 1981, I believe. And it's a cartoon adaptation of Alexandre Dumas' The Three Musketeers, very famous novel from the real olden days. When was it first published?
Oh, the 19th century. I don't know the exact year.
Yes, it came out over 2 years in serialized form, didn't it?
Ah, yes.
And then was put together in a book. And we've been reading the novels recently and have been commenting how full of cliffhangers and excitement and swashbuckling action they are. So they obviously worked very well as a serialized magazine piece.
And humour as well. They're very funny in places.
Yes, even translated from French rather badly. You can see some of the very amusing bits.
You get a good sense of his style of writing.
You do, and there are bits where we say, oh, that would have been very poetic in the original French, I'm sure, and here it sounds a bit weird. But it also makes the story a very good children's cartoon adaptation about a world habited almost entirely by dogs, which is what Dogtanian and the Three Muskehounds is. Now, it was translated into English in 1985, I believe, so it was a few years old, and it showed on children's BBC quite a lot in the late 80s. And very early 90s. I mean, they must have shown it about 4 or 5 times, well, 3 or 4 perhaps, because it always seemed to be on. And we were always catching various bits of it. I don't know if we ever sat and watched the 26-episode series all the way through. But we used to watch it a lot, didn't we?
I do remember liking it very much indeed and looking forward to it. I never remembered anything that happened unless I managed to see it again at a later date. We got the first 3 episodes out of Blockbusters once, didn't we, on a video?
Yes, indeed.
So I remembered bits of those, and the bits from Dogtanian the movie, which was all the sort of most important bits, put together into a sort of hour-and-a-half feature.
Yes, it was. It was the most compelling bits of story, the Queen's Diamonds, and when Dogtanian first meets the Muskehounds and so on. In many ways, they chose very well, I think, the best bits of the series to turn into a movie.
But I never remembered anything else, even the interesting story arc where they go to Spain and Athos subdues a rampaging bull, which you always remembered, didn't you?
Oh, I did remember that, and it turns out actually it's the penultimate episode, isn't it? Or the few episodes leading up to the penultimate episode. And I remembered the bit where after Athos had subdued the bull and been poisoned by Milady and Pip was throwing him the magic seeds through the bars. I remembered all that. And there's some great stuff in it. Great action, some very amusing parts, great characterization, and I can see why it's stuck very much in a lot of people's memories. We'll just talk perhaps about the characters, main characters, and then the story arcs from it and say what we think of them. Obviously, the main character is Dogtanian, and that is obvious, based on D'Artagnan from the book. And he is a very good lead character, very compelling, very amusing, certainly a flawed protagonist. And I don't know how he was in the original Spanish, but in the English version, Cam Clark, so famous as New He-Man and Leonardo and other roles, does such a wonderful job bringing him to life, doesn't he?
Yes, he makes him very, very likeable and even lovable, sort of naive and full of youthful optimism. And one of D'Artagnan/Dogtanian's huge character traits is that he has an incredibly quick temper and he keeps picking fights, which isn't a very likeable characteristic, I suppose, but Cam Clark injects it with so much humour, it really works.
Yes, many of the plot points in the series are reliant on Dogtanian being very hot-headed, jumping to conclusions, and, as you say, Cam Clark does those so well with such humour that he comes across as likeable rather than annoying or too hot-headed, too impetuous, which is very skillfully done, I think. Of course, if he didn't work as a protagonist, we wouldn't enjoy following him through the series. But then we have the Three Muskehounds, or as they're unfortunately called in the English dub of the first series, Musketeers, because the play on words, as it were, Muskehounds, doesn't seem to have made it through to the final script, which is a bit of a shame.
But it is in the title.
But it is in the title, and the narrator will sometimes say it when he's saying coming up next week. The Three Muskehounds, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. He can't say their names.
He says a couple of things that didn't quite get through to the actors in the translation, doesn't he? Like a mouse called Peter. His name's Marco.
His name's Marco, but of course it was Pedro in the original Spanish, which is Peter. Now, Athos and Porthos, as is widely known, were kind of swapped round from the books, which is strange, but then we did notice when reading the first book that some characteristics from both Athos and Porthos in the book were put into Athos in the cartoon. It kind of leaves Porthos in the cartoon as not having very much character. I mean, he's supposed to be, as the video box said, calm and aristocratic and a kind of father figure for Dogtanian and a leader of the group. But he's a bit flat sometimes.
Athos in the book is the one who was married to Milady, and his main thing in the book and in films aimed more at families or adults is that he is incredibly depressed and disillusioned, and he gets drunk the entire time, not because he likes it, but to drown his sorrows.
You can't really do that in the cartoon, can you?
Exactly. As well as being a wise, seasoned musketeer and father figure to D'Artagnan, Porthos in the books also gets drunk, which is possibly one of the areas where the confusion arose. He's very, very large and physical.
Very much admired for his great physical strength.
That's right. And there are sections in the book where Athos uses physical violence, which is possibly another area where confusion arose.
Yes, there is quite a bit of overlap. It's interesting.
Having read The Three Musketeers 20 years after, and the first third of the Vicomte de Bragelonne, which finishes up as the Man in the Iron Mask, Porthos gets kind of dumbed down and turned into a bit of a joke, doesn't he, as Dumas' stories go on?
He does, which is a fate shared by Athos on the cartoon, really, in the second series.
So I think that's awfully interesting, but I always remember now, I never used to because I was too young, Athos's first appearance in the cartoon, so this is Athos who ought to be Porthos, the big strong one, being very striking. He's drunk, and he comes out of an inn and Dogtanian speaking to, who is it? Is it a sort of palace guard or something?
Well, Monsieur Bonacieux is there.
Oh, he's there, is he? Whoever it is saying, oh, look, here's Athos. He's a very famous musketeer.
That's Bonacieux.
And Athos comes out all completely drunk, and he's about 3 times taller than anyone else in the scene. I think he actually shrinks a bit for the rest of the series.
He does.
And he gets into a fight with them, and as you always point out, he does not once draw his sword. He chucks tables at them and all that kind of thing.
Yes, musketeers are very famous for fighting with their swords rather than their muskets. You've never seen them with muskets in the cartoon. But Athos doesn't fight with a sword in that first episode he's in, which is actually episode 4 of the series. And I always used to love it on the cartoon when I was young, when Athos would do things like chuck the Cardinal's guards around, uproot trees, break down doors, that sort of thing. It's very entertaining. And it is the kind of thing he, or Porthos, does in the book. And part of his dumbing down in the second series, which we'll talk about a little later, is not doing that so much. So Athos is a very satisfying character to watch as a young viewer in that way. But he, at times, can kind of take over the calming influence, older, wise father figure that Porthos sometimes has, which is another thing, I think, that kind of detracts from Porthos really having any character in the cartoon.
Can I tell you one of my favourite scenes involving Athos? Another one.
Let's do that.
The episode where the Musketeers are not allowed to draw their swords at all, because then they're going to not be allowed to be the palace guards anymore, that's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Because it's considered that they've been too violent. Obviously, the Cardinals being in the King's ear, we'll talk about them later. And so the Cardinals' guards are going around provoking all the Musketeers, and one of them's making Athos crawl through his legs in order to get past. And the way that it's animated, you just know Athos is never going to fit through his legs. But you don't actually get to the stage of them having to find this out and try and work their way around it, because then Dogtanian comes along and things kick off because he has to crawl through the guard's legs. But he's really, really small. And then he starts a fight and everything, and the scene goes off in a different direction. But I think it's very comical visually, Athos about to comply and crawl through this guard's legs, and he's about 6 times the size of him.
Yes, it does have plenty of visual comedy as well, which transcends language.
Another funny thing is that Dogtanian, voiced by Cam Clarke, doing a brilliant job, is coming up and saying, Athos, can you lend me some money? And Athos is saying, oh, we'll ride in a minute, and he's on the ground. It's just really funny.
Yes, Dogtanian seems kind of oblivious to what's going on. It's that young naivety that he displays so well, and in such a likeable way in the voiceover. You could have him be quite obnoxious if you didn't do the voiceover properly.
You could.
It's very clever the way Cam Clarke always looks at the animation and what Dogtanian's doing. There's that bit where he's running up the stairs, isn't there? And he makes him go, wow, and he falls down. It's just a very, very skillful, overdub voice performance.
He puts a lot of dogginess into it as well. He makes him pant like a dog and whine if he's feeling subdued or frightened or anything like that.
Always bearing in mind that you're playing a dog whilst voicing Dogtanian and the Three Muskehounds is a definite skill, one that Cam Clarke has. The other main musketeer, or muskehound, of course, is Aramis, who I always used to say was my favourite, and I guess he is. He starts off as a bit of a Bible basher, and as we know from the books, Aramis is a holy character who later will become priest, very high up in the end, I think, Cardinal, Archbishop or something.
We'll see it when we read The Man in the Iron Mask.
Yes.
If you want to get that from a film adaptation, you really need to watch Jeremy Irons in The Man in the Iron Mask, because in the actual adaptations of The Three Musketeers, they tend to go more for the sort of womanizer aspect.
Oh, that's the other aspect, which of course is played down in the cartoon, but it is in there. But I do like early Aramis, where he's saying they have to pray for the souls of the do-badders, and he kills the guy and says, may God have mercy on your soul. It's quite amusing. They do dumb that down a little, or, smooth it out as the cartoon goes on.
He has one girlfriend in the first series, and just briefly mentioning the second series, he has about 10, sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 at a time. In the book, it's somewhere in the middle. He has one girlfriend at a time, but he has a few monogamous relationships, and it's also hinted that he might have a couple of boyfriends as well, isn't it?
Oh, yes, certainly not something we go into in the cartoon, but perhaps they would nowadays. But one thing the first series does suffer from is not kind of using the Three Muskehounds to their fullest extent, and Dogtanian will go off and do things with his servant Planchet and his, or Planchette, as they call him, and Pip the mouse and his horse Sandy, and the Musketeers will kind of fade into the background at times, which is one thing the second series is slightly better with, I think, having them as a foursome and doing things together.
A good thing about that Spain story arc is that the Musketeers are all in it.
Yes, and in many ways it's kind of like the second series, but done much better, that Spain bit.
By the way, Planchette is a bear, so he's an exception to the most people are a dog rule.
Yes, and another one is Milady, who is a cat, which fits in very nicely because she's
evil.
An evil, spiteful woman, and she's catty in many ways. And she's one of the main antagonists, of course. The main antagonist being Cardinal Richelieu, who has a lot of rivalry with the Musketeers, the Cardinal's Guards and the Musketeers, and is very much wanting to control, rule France, have a lot of influence over the king. And in the first series, he does have a lot of power and influence over the king, because the king is a completely useless, clueless fop in the first series. You could make him less of a fop than he is if you dubbed him differently, but he doesn't really do anything in the first series, and it's very, very different in the second with the king, when he becomes much more of a protagonist, much more rounded and heroic character. But Richelieu is very good in the first series, quite dark and sinister, and in the book he's a lot less really of an antagonist, isn't he? He is the main antagonist, but it's less that the musketeers are kind of presented as goodies and the cardinal's guards, or the police, as they've been translated, are the baddies. And D'Artagnan and the musketeers in the book always have to have respect for the cardinal and do what he says, and they're not always necessarily in the right.
Yes, it's not so black and white. It's about more sort of realistic, perhaps political rivalries.
Yeah.
Although the cardinal does try to discredit the queen, which is pretty evil, but then is the queen actually in the right herself?
I don't think she is in the book. I think she's having terrible liaisons with the Duke of Buckingham, isn't she? But of course, in the cartoon series, she's not having terrible liaisons with him. They're
just friends.
They have a pure and simple friendship, which the evil cardinal is trying to make people believe is more than that.
Maybe in that case, then they shouldn't meet secretly in obscure corners of the city and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's where it doesn't quite match up, isn't it? Then we have Widemere, the captain of the Cardinal's Guards, who in his very first episode, episode 4, is really a very good character, conniving, evil, underhand, manipulative, and very quickly becomes the bumbling oaf that we're quite used to seeing from having watched Series 2 quite a lot.
We had quite a lot of Series 2 on video, not all of it, and Widemere is the most extraordinary idiot. And when the first series came out on video and DVD, and I was watching it with Jake, and we watched Widemere's first appearance, my jaw actually dropped.
Yes.
I couldn't believe it. He was coming up with this cunning plan. It was very sort of underhand and sneaky.
Yes, and it's very well done in the shadows, in the darkness, in the veiled coach with him and the Cardinal. It's quite evocative imagery.
Have you a plan?
Yes, Eminence.
And I was like, say what? But the kind of baddie they were trying to create there was really the worst kind of sneaky, unchivalrous kind of slime ball sycophant, wasn't it?
Yes, who then becomes something of a coward when it really comes to the crunch.
But they didn't stick to it.
It's a shame because villains like that can be very effective. We'll perhaps talk in the not-too-distant future about Toad Air Marshal from Bucky O'Hare, who's one of those. And something we might never talk about, but possibly will, is Captain Vervain from Watership Down, who very much falls into that category. And it's a very effective thing to do with a villain, and in many ways it's a shame they didn't stick to it with Widemere. But it's a very interesting antagonist, but does he stay an antagonist? Not really. In the first series is Rochefort.
I always say Rochefort's my favourite character because he's sort of quite sexy, really.
Yes, dashing.
Dashing and a bit evil, but he is very honourable in many ways, and he finishes up coming through for Dogtanian and doing the right thing.
Very much like Mendoza in that respect, really, from the Mysterious City of Gold.
I find him very appealing. He's got really cool boots on. He has a black moustache, which Dogtanian actually nicknames him Black Moustache. He has a good look about him, and he's an interesting character. He's a very clever kind of a villain. He has got some balls. He isn't afraid to argue a bit with the Cardinal when he thinks that the Cardinal is wrong. He can be quite sinister sometimes, like when he's kidnapping Juliet, who we'll talk about in a bit. I think he's being really quite villainous, which you like to see in a villain. And a couple of times he makes us laugh, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. He's really a very well-rounded character. And one good thing about the second series is that they don't fall into the trap of bringing back Rochefort and kind of nullifying the journey that he's had as a character, which they kind of do with other characters like Widemere and, could argue, Milady. So there's only good things to say about Rochefort, really.
The breed of dog that he is has a kind of black line down the middle of its head, Or he does, anyway. I think it's part of his markings. I like to think that's homage to the scar that he has in the book, sometimes translated as being on his temple and sometimes his cheek, so you can imagine whereabouts that would be.
Yeah, sometimes it's difficult to identify what actual breed of dog they're meant to be, isn't it? Dogtanian is Snoopy-like, so I guess he's a beagle.
Beagles look nothing like that,
Real
really.
beagles don't really look like that. Athos is generally agreed to be a St. Bernard, I think.
I think so.
Because he's huge. Porthos, some sort of German Shepherd thing.
Yeah.
Aramis, some sort of Spaniel. The King is a King Charles Spaniel, isn't he?
I think so, but actually he doesn't look like one. They're not yellow.
And the Queen is a collie for some reason.
Well, she could be a corgi, couldn't she?
Well, I guess she could be if it's supposed to be royal annotation.
But then would the Spanish have thought of that?
They might have done, particularly if they're thinking about the English-speaking audience, which they probably were when they made it.
And Rochefort's something sort of pointy with long ears.
And Widdermere claims he's a bulldog at some point. So I don't know, I guess it is possible to identify them, but they're not always obvious what they're meant to be. What other characters should we talk about? Obviously Juliet, who is extremely manipulative of Dogtanian and his affections, but she will come through for him in the end.
The reason that she manipulates him is because her first priority is to get messages to the Duke of Buckingham from the Queen, or do what the Queen wants.
Yes, she's fiercely loyal to the Queen, whom she works for.
So I think that's sort of giveable, understandable, explainable manipulation anyway.
Yes, Juliet very much is a flawed protagonist, and she and Dogtanian do have this kind of cute relationship where he's kind of got puppy love, puppy dog eyes. She's a bit older than him, a bit more sophisticated perhaps, a bit more knowledgeable about life, and they kind of get thrown into this intense situation together, and it's just rather fun and rather swashbucklingly romantic, as the original books kind of fit into that category. And it's pulled off rather well in cartoon and dog form.
Dear impression of Dogtanian having a dream.
Oh yes, Dogtanian has dreams, shows his priorities in life. Soon I will be a musketeer, my Juliet. And what else does he say?
I think that's it.
Yes, because his two ambitions are to be a musketeer and have Juliet, which of course he will get at the end of the series after 26 episodes.
It's really sweet, and I actually think I did used to ship them when I was very young.
Yes, I mean, how can you watch the show and not? It's just very compelling.
After the Duke of Buckingham story arc is over, Juliet really gets sidelined, doesn't she?
Yes, she does. They even start drawing her the same height as him, which is a shame, because she's meant to be rather taller to show how she's older and from a different plane of existence. So she kind of loses her Juliet. We'll just come back to Milady briefly. We were saying, Rosie was saying, how Athos in the book was married to her, and they do kind of touch on that in the cartoon with Porthos, where he's saying, Milady, you know her? Or just by reputation, and it's obvious not just by reputation.
It might not be that they were married,
yes,
but he obviously knows more than he's letting on, but then they never expand on it.
They can't go into huge details there, but it's a shame they don't go into any at all. And Milady is very good for the underhand, sneaky work that the Cardinal's getting up to. The bit where she seduces, charms, and drugs Dogtanian is always very amusing.
She does exactly the same thing to Athos, doesn't she?
She does.
And it's even a bit more explicitly sort of sexual, isn't it?
Athos with his panting and so on.
Following her into the next room, or trying to, but he collapses before he makes it.
And I do like the way she's teasing Dogtanian, riding off in her coach and throwing various favours out of the window, and he doesn't realise he's being seduced. You dropped your handkerchief. You also dropped this flower.
The flower is for you, Dogtanian.
Yes, it's very cute naivety there. It's extremely entertaining stuff.
And she hypnotises him into going to kill the Queen, and so the Queen bashes him up with a chair, which we always find very funny.
Absolutely brilliant, the scene there. Hold him, Juliet, while I smash him over the head several times with his chair. Absolutely brilliant. The Queen in that first series is quite feisty, but again, after the Duke of Buckingham stuff, she's really in the background. And I guess the other main character to talk about is Pip, who turns up almost halfway through the series. And he, as everybody knows, is a mouse. who becomes Dogtanian's sort of hanger-on friend.
Sidekick.
Yes, why couldn't I think of that term, hanger-on? All good protagonists need a sidekick. And at first, like Widmer, Pip is very on the ball and helps Dogtanian to get his mind in order and do good thinking and careful planning and perhaps grow up a bit.
He says to him things like, you need to use your head before you use your sword.
Yes, useful advice. But again, like Widmer, he quickly goes into the territory of falling over into the fountain and skating round on the waxed palace floor and things, which isn't such good use of Pip. But what is good about him is that his voice actor dubber guy is so amusing and always reacts to funny bits of animation and plot points, and he's particularly good in the second series where he's always putting in funny ad-libs.
He does do it in the first series too, like when he's fighting this cat and he shoves a pole down his throat and he says, "There, now you're a polecat."
Absolutely brilliant. And it'll move on to things like laugh all you want, just don't drop the hat when Pip's in the hat being held over the chasm. He's supposed to have been rescued by Athos in the hat, but it looks like he's in just as much danger as ever. And see if he can get over here without tripping. He says that while Pip's off camera, but the Musketeers have been tripping far too much at that. So Pip is a very important character, a very heavily featured character, a very good character in many ways, but he is one that's quite quickly dumbed down, which is a bit of a shame. So those are really all the main characters.
Oh, what about Treville?
Apart from Monsieur Treville, the head of the Musketeers, who sends for Dogtanian to come to Paris in the first place, because Treville and Dogtanian's dad are old friends, and maybe more, who knows. But he is often there just as a kind of practical character to do things like go to the king and say the cardinal's bad and argue with the cardinal about who's best, the Musketeers and Cardinal's guards, who's better, I should say, and tell Dogtanian and the Musketeers to go here and there, do that and the other.
The voice for Treville is very good. He actually has the wrong voice in the first episode.
Which is a bit of a shame, because he has some of his best lines in his first episode.
But it's a sort of wise, old, fatherly kind of voice, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very good. And it's one of the ones that is the same in both series, which very much fits in with his older appearance in the second series.
I think his best appearance is that first episode, actually, where he has the wrong voice, where there's that very funny bulldog mum with her whiny little son, Terence, and Treville is explaining to her that being of high birth means nothing and he can't be a musketeer unless he proves himself with his sword and whatever else you need.
Which is actually an extremely important piece of the series, because we get into a bit of social commentary. As everyone knows, when they interact with any form of musketeers, we're only, just over 100 years, 150 years away from the Revolution. Things aren't very good for the peasantry in France, and that scene very much shows that Terence and his mom, or certainly the mom, the Countess, considers very highly that she can do anything she wants because of her high birth and her status, and she dressed Terence up in all his finery so that he can have whatever she wants him to have, and Treville's very much like, no, we don't do things like that here, which shows that times are changing. I'm not sure the real Musketeers had that sort of ethics about the social classes in France. I mean, they're just sort of oafish in the books, aren't they? And part of the problem, really. But it is an interesting bit of social commentary in the cartoon. That first episode with Treville is particularly good because he talks to Dogtanian about the olden days with Dogtanian's father, and you don't resemble your father at all when he sees that Dogtanian's naive and romantic and spunky, and his father's very much demure, old soldier sort of character, and perhaps Treville indicates he always has been, even when he was young, so you get some interesting insights there into the past. Let's talk about the story arcs. The first episode is very good. I like Dogtanian's frenemy, Francois, who is voiced by Rebecca Forstadt, who does Juliet, and actually sounds a bit young. He sounds kind of adolescent, and they're really supposed to be about 18, but he's done extremely well, and Dogtanian's on his way off to Paris, and all the barriers of rivalry kind of break down, and you get a touching moment between them. That's very good. It's got a great bit of overdub, hasn't it? I got a clavichord lesson. The first episode, which is someone being very funny as one of the local boys who doesn't want to stick around and fight Dogtanian. And you see there, Dogtanian's very much become top dog, literally, in his small hometown of Bern, and is setting off on the road to adventure, the road to growing up fully, and very much is out of his depth, as he discovers over the next few episodes. So again, it's a show about a journey, about growing up, about rites of passage.
In the second episode, we meet Rochefort.
We do, and Milady.
And Milady, and then we don't meet any more main ones until the fourth episode, do we?
That's right. 2 and 3 are kind of Dogtanian's journey and the trials and tribulations.
I do like that second episode. It is the second one, isn't it? I was talking earlier about Dogtanian picking fights.
Yeah.
He's been sent off to Paris with a letter for Treville and a certain amount of money, and he picks a fight with Rochefort for no particular reason, just because he's annoyed him, and they cause all this damage at the inn where they are, and Dogtanian has to give the innkeeper all his money. Rochefort steals his letter. He just loses everything because he got a bit cross with Rochefort being a bit sort of pompous and looking down his nose at him.
You country bumpkin! But we can't hate him for it because Cam Clark voices him so well. I tell you who we do meet, actually, in the third episode, regular character, Juliet.
Ah, yes, of course.
And you start to get the Dogtanian and Juliet relationship coming in there, but it's mostly just Dogtanian being a vagrant round Paris and getting into more fights with the rabbit and so on. And when we get to episode 4, which is a little sort of mini-story to introduce the Musketeers about one of the Cardinal's guards pretending to be Porthos, which is Widdermer's devious, sneaky plan that we mentioned earlier, it is a bit of a relief after all that to finally get to see them, which is a shame the video from the video shop only had the first 3 episodes. If it had the first 4, it would have been much better, wouldn't it?
Oh well.
But then we properly, after that, get into the first big sequence of events where Dogtanian annoys all 3 of the Musketeers and agrees to fight them, and they get discovered by the Cardinal's guards and all become great friends, which is a very famous part from the book and is in most, if not all, of the films, isn't it?
Oh yes, definitely. Even that really awful one which turns into steampunk with airships and stuff.
Oh, that rubbish, yes. So that's all great stuff. Really, really entertaining and full of character.
The other thing that Dogtanian does in this inn with Rochefort, of course, is break his sword.
Oh, his father's old sword that he had to take such good care of.
So he's really got nothing, and then he's trying to get hold of a sword so he can be seen by Treville, and he gets this really crappy one that he has to work for. And I love that bit where he's fighting off all these Cardinal's guards, and he hasn't even drawn his sword because it's so old and bent it won't come out of the scabbard.
Yes, and that's Cam Clark again doing some brilliant work. Oh, stupid thing, and things like that. Absolutely brilliant.
And everyone's going, oh, they're not supposed to draw their swords. Oh, look, he hasn't drawn his sword.
Yes, that's Athos coming out and being the voice of reason and rather clever, getting Dogtanian out of trouble. He has not drawn his sword, as you claim. I actually thought that was Treville, because it would kind of fit in with it being Treville. Athos in a kind of Porthos role.
Yeah, Porthos should have said that, made him a bit more interesting.
But Porthos was busy with his injured shoulder at that point.
Oh, yes.
So that's why Athos kind of took it over. But that's all great stuff. And then we get into the Queen and the Duke of Buckingham stuff, which was really the main part of the movie version of the series. And it's all really good, isn't it? Back and forth from England, fighting Milady.
Don't you mean England?
Oh, England, yes. Getting the diamond studs back and forth, foiling Widdermer at the key by dressing up as an old lady.
Of course, in the Diamond Studs Duke of Buckingham arc, Juliet gets kidnapped, doesn't she?
Yes, I do very much like the bit, and I always remember the bit, which comes a little further on after she's been kidnapped the first time, where Dogtanian's worried she's been kidnapped again, and he's going round Paris accosting all the ladies in pink dresses he can find, going, Juliet, Juliet! And it's very, very amusing.
And one of them has this bear called Husband, doesn't she?
Oh, Husband!
Massive bear comes to attack him.
And Dogtanian and Pip get chased around by Husband, and it's very amusing and entertaining. But of course it has its place in the story as well. So that's all wonderful stuff. Then you get things like the contests to become a musketeer, and musketeers and the Cardinal's Guards in conflict. And a little later we get the Blue Falcon arc, which is the weakest bit of the series. It has the episode that's all about Dogtanian and Pip being on an island with an elephant, which is a bit of a trough in the series, I think it's fair to say.
It's really weird. An interesting line in that bit is, Porthos once told me that if you hear drums in the jungle, it's just a warning. So they're trying to get the father figure kind of thing there.
Yes, they are. Porthos is the wise one who's taught Dogtanian a lot and helped him grow up the most, but doesn't always come across actually on the screen, that. Then you've got the Marco or Pedro or Peter stuff, which is very funny when he's doing the satirical impression of Cardinal Richelieu, that you mustn't laugh at your Prime Minister. And then you have all the stuff where Marco gets manipulated and pretends to think that Pip is his father. Oh, did you find your father yet?
Pip's been knocked unconscious by the bells of Notre Dame and stuff.
Absolutely great stuff, that. And then finally we get the Spain arc, which we've talked about quite a lot, and in many ways it's the strongest. It's certainly the strongest after the Duke of Buckingham Diamond stuff, and it has the most consistent, established characters for all the main characters taking part in it, I think. And it's very entertaining stuff, the Spain arc, and as it is at the end, no wonder it always stuck in my mind, the stuff with Athos and the bull and the poison and the magic seeds. And then, of course, we have the final episode, which is a bit of a standalone, which is a very good, entertaining, pithy episode with everyone on very good form. And, of course, it will end up with Dogtanian becoming a musketeer, muskehound.
It's very striking, I think, with the poisoned wine and what Rochefort does and what Widmer does.
Yes, very good. You could watch that and really get the characters and their main characteristics and kind of the journey they've all been on through the series.
You know, it finishes up for Widmer with him running off going, I'm not going to work for the Cardinal anymore. He says it a bit better than that. I'll be a free man, but then he doesn't, it turns out.
Yeah, 10 years later he's back working for the Cardinal, and it would have been so easy to do something like that with Rochefort. And it would have damaged Rochefort much more as a character than it does Widmer. You can imagine him kind of crawling back to Richelieu, which indeed he seems to have done. But the sequel series, The Return of Dogtanian, was animated in 1990, so almost 10 years after the first one was made, and it's animated in a very different style than the first series. The first series, like The Mysterious Cities of Gold, is quite anime-ish, but not completely. But the second series looks much sort of softer, more Western.
On the website, Alice Dryden's website, which I expect we'll link.
Excellent website, yes, that must go in the description.
I think she describes it as a more Western style of animation, and actually it doesn't look as good because of the dog's muzzles. It looks a bit weird when they're speaking. It works much better in the more anime style.
It does. And we perhaps wouldn't care so much about that if the script was on point and the voice acting was on point and the actual story arcs were on point. But actually, none of them really are. I have said when writing about it in the past that The Return of Dogtanian is rather coherent as a sequel on paper, and it is. You get, in the final arc, Milady kidnapping Dogtanian's daughter, and it's not for any more reason than she hates him after the first series, and we don't have to be told that in the dialogue. It is assumed that we know who Milady is and why she hates Dogtanian and wants revenge on him after all these years. So it's very much written for people who know the first series and are happy with the character relationships, which is good because it doesn't feel like a standalone thing. It feels like, as I say, a coherent sequel. But actually, when you get down to the nitty-gritty of all the story arcs and the characterization, and unfortunately the voice work, it's actually extremely inadequate, isn't it? And like you've been saying, trying to follow up such a great epic series as Dogtanian and the Three Muskehounds is a terribly difficult thing to do and isn't really ever going to work.
Yes, I said it about Digimon and the Mysterious Cities of Gold, didn't I?
Which is why this is the end of our sort of trilogy, as you said.
It's got a lot of, as we were saying earlier, falling over kind of slapstick comedy sequences.
Which does kind of start coming in towards the end of the first series, but not to a detrimental degree.
I'd like to talk about some good points, I think. I think some of the voice work is good, particularly the people who have stuck around from the last series. Pip, Widmer, Juliet all have the same voice.
Treville, it's very good to hear all them back, and they do some good work.
The one new voice I prefer is Aramis.
Oh, yeah.
I think Eddie Frierson, or Frierson, I imagine Frierson, has a very good voice, and I thought Aramis's original voice was a bit weird, to be honest. So that was a good addition to the show. Athos's new voice is very kind of dull, isn't it?
It really epitomises the dumbing down of him. Boy, am I ever dumb. But you didn't used to be.
He takes a few episodes off that guy, actually, so does Eddie Frierson. But the Athos voice, I can't remember his name, takes a few more episodes off. And the replacement voice, I think, is better. There's this scene where he's getting chatted up by this apple-selling woman.
Yeah.
And it really struck me there. He gets quite a lot to say, and he has to chat up this woman, and then he has to get cross because Widmer's accusing him of stealing the apple. The apple was given to me, it's mine. And it's just a more sort of normal, powerful, large man's voice.
Yeah, it's a lot more like the voice from the first series, and it does work a lot better, which really does show that the voice work and the sound of the voice, not even the quality of the voice work, is so important to establish the character. The main Athos voice in the second series does make him sound very oafish, very thick, sort of dullard character, and most of the script work does back that up in the second series, which is a bit of a shame. But as I was saying earlier, it does have the Four Muskehounds as a kind of awesome foursome, which the first series does miss out on. So I think it has a lot of potential, the second series. I think the stories in themselves don't really need changing. As I say, they're coherent as a sequel. I think the approach of having the gang doing stuff is the right approach. Just in the nitty-gritty, it's not quite there, is it?
Shall we talk about Dogtanian's new voice?
Well, Dogtanian's new voice is absolutely awful, isn't it?
In many ways it is. It's not a bad impression of the voice that Cam Clarke gives him, but it doesn't have that sort of heart and likability. He makes him just really annoying. As we were saying, it would be easy to do.
That's it, isn't it? It's Dave Mallow, who is one of the script adapters, and the other one did the voice of Porthos in the second series, doing, as you say, a very competent impersonation of Cam Clarke in terms of sound, but not in terms of performance and the heart that he's injecting into the part. It kind of wouldn't work anyway, just taking off exactly what Cam Clarke did in the first series, because he's supposed to be 10 years older, 10 years wiser. Yes, he's still supposed to be the same sort of impetuous character, but having him doing an impression of his younger self, I think, makes him come across as obnoxious, childish in many ways, and it just doesn't really work on any level, which is a pity for your protagonist.
That's a shame. And what about Porthos's new voice? It's just okay, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just very nothing, and adds to the effect of Porthos being very nothing. I think, as I said earlier, the second series is better in some ways for the king, although when we first meet him, he's not being very proactive about getting out of the predicament he's been put in by his evil twin brother.
I didn't get onto it when I was saying I wanted to talk about positive things, went off in a different direction, but Bugeaud is my favourite character. Again, it's the evil count. He is way more evil than Rochefort. You can tell what breed he is because he looks like Scooby-Doo, but white. And
with
black.
Black blotches, yes.
He's a great Dane. Not all the voice actors are actually credited, are they? For instance, Pip isn't, but Bugeaud is, so we think maybe they're the cream of the voice voice actors.
It's about half of them, really, isn't it? If you look them up on the internet, you find only about half actually credited on the show.
But one of them is Bijou, and he does a terrific job. He can be very amusing. He can be not so much sinister. He's not really subtle enough to be sinister. He's just really evil.
Just really, really evil. He's not the kind of sycophant in the background evil, like Widdermere and other such characters. He's in-your-face evil.
In many ways, he's the main baddie. I've compared him before to Shredder and Krang, Toad, Borg and Complex. Bijou and Blancbec, with the King's evil twin brother, have that kind of a relationship. Even though Blancbec is pulling the strings, Bijou does all the legwork and has most of the screen time.
Yes, he does. He's very much the force of evil in the series that's doing all the work getting out there.
A real high point is Bijou blowing up this rickety bridge that they're all crossing, which they've been back and forth in this place before and never had to cross a rickety bridge, but never mind.
And you can't say at that point you think he's doing the right thing, or he thinks he's doing the right thing. He just really enjoys lacing the bridge with gunpowder, lighting it, and going, ha 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 ha, I'm going to blow it up.
Yeah, later on he's going to torture information out of the Muskehounds by sticking his sword in the fire and then poking it at them, and he's heating it up going ha 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 ha.
That is the best episode, really, isn't it?
It is, very much so.
It's got Bijou at his best in it, unsurprisingly. And we must mention how funny it is when the King turns up and pretends to be his evil twin brother Blancbec so he can send Bijou away, and then, instead of saying, "Don't worry, Muskehounds, it's me, the King," he then gets out his dagger and pretends he's going to kill Dogtanian and goes up to him going, "Hee." And then when he releases Dogtanian, he's like, "Don't you recognise me, my friend?" And Dogtanian's probably thinking, "Well, no, not if you come up to me pretending to be your evil twin brother with a dagger going, hee."
How funny, very funny. I mean, it's to surprise the audience,
It's to surprise the audience.
And make us go, oh, phew, it was the King all along, but it's not very realistic.
It's one of those things where it's to surprise the audience, and when you watch it back, it doesn't make sense in the context of the show, which are in a lot of things, really. We've touched there on the first story arc, The Man in the Golden Muzzle, which is, of course, based on The Man in the Iron Mask from the literature, in which Blancbec, the King's evil twin brother, has kidnapped the King, stuck him in the monastery, has taken his place, and everyone's saying, "Oh, why is the King suddenly evil and being horrible to everyone and eating jam and stroking cats?" And the reason, of course, is it's not the King. And that's the reason that the Queen and Pip bring the four Muskehounds back together, although goodness knows what they were being paid for while they were all off in different places and not doing any work.
How badly do they pull that storyline off?
Terribly. The Muskehounds do nothing to investigate the problem. Absolutely nothing. They've come to Paris specially to find out what's up with the King, and they don't investigate. And Pip, good old Pip, comes across it quite by accident when he goes to visit his cousin at the monastery. And what should the Muskehounds have done? You've worked it out.
They should have kept a very close eye on the King, in inverted commas there. They should have said, who is this strange man, this mysterious stranger who keeps coming to see him? We've never seen him before. He looks evil. Let's follow him and see where he goes.
And of course he would have gone to the monastery, and there they would have seen, oh, the King's not the King at all. He's being kept prisoner at the monastery.
And then, you know what, they would have actually met Bijou and learned his name. Whereas when they meet him for the first time, they're going, "Oh, Bijou," and we're like, "You never met him."
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? On paper, everything is there. It has all the potential it needs, but it's just not pulled off. One of the things the Queen specifically tells the Musketeers, or possibly Juliet, when Juliet sneaks into the palace to learn what they've already found out anyway, is that she is worried by the fact that the King's meeting strange men in the middle of the night, which would worry you if your husband was doing that. But they should use that as a direct trigger to actually go and investigate these strange men, Bijou and the other followers of Blomberg and actually do that bit of investigation properly, as Rosie says.
Shall we talk about the misuse of Pip as well?
Yes.
All through the series, they're laughing at Pip and going, "Oh, Pip, you're so useless, and you always boast and make out like you did everything, but actually we did it." But in fact, Pip's right. He did do everything.
Pip does do everything. Not only finding the king, but letting the others in to rescue him. And there's this bit where Athos and Pip have 3 guards to dispatch, and
Yes.
Athos loses his sword, and Pip defeats them all. And then what does the king say to Pip when he's been rescued? "A court jester. That's how I think of you, my friend. And I think you owe your absolute life to this mouse who's found you and rescued you pretty much single-handedly, and you're saying he's a court jester."
He even admitted it, right, after they got him out, didn't he?
Yes.
"I owe much to you, little one," or something, he says.
He does.
And then he forgets.
And then the next episode, yeah, you're the court jester, you're nothing. He does everything, Pip. He rescues, at the very end of the series, he rescues everyone with his gun.
Shall we go through the story arcs and then say how Pip actually sorted everything out?
Yes, I think it's time to do that.
So that was the first story arc. The second one is the Duke of Bavaria.
Which is excessively long. It's always 4 episodes longer than I think it is. And again, it has a lot of potential, where Blanc-Bac is messing up international relations by insulting the Duke of Bavaria. "You have a crappy little country, my friend," sort of thing. And the Muskehounds have to come and show him the real king and sort that out, and potentially it's a very good next step from the first arc, but it's pulled off really badly.
To be fair, I don't think Pip really does anything in particular, does he?
Not really, no.
Oh, well. Do you know what? Did I miss out the poisoning and Alexei?
Ah, yes.
That's just 2 episodes, isn't it?
The second thing is actually 2 episodes, the poisoning and Alexei, where Blanc-Bac has decided, well, I'm just going to kill the king, which I've had plenty of opportunity to do, but I'm going to try and do it now with some poison. And Alexei is the magician, alchemist sort of thing, who cures the king. But it's terrible how the poison manages to make it into the king's food, isn't it?
There's a maid in the kitchen who sees someone tampering with the food and it leaves the kitchen anyway. And I always say she should be knocked unconscious and sort of out of sight of everyone else.
Yeah.
No way she should lose her job. No way should that have ever left the kitchen.
And doesn't he have a royal taster to die on his behalf? He should.
He should. He will from now on.
Well, particularly now that they know that Blanc-Bac is around and trying to depose him.
So that one makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah. Duke of Bavaria. Duke of Bavaria is the arc that has the episode we were saying was very much the best in the series, with the blowing up of the bridge and so on. And that is the best bit, but it's got absolute dross leading up to it. And what's the next arc? It's Peregrine Hood, isn't it?
Our parents used to annoy the hell out of us by calling him Peregrine Hood. He's not a peregrine falcon, he's a bloody dog.
Yes, Peregrine Hood, as in pedigree chum.
And green, as in forest and stuff.
And as you may imagine, he's a kind of spoof on Robin Hood. And his followers are almost like Robin Hood's followers, aren't they? Little Dog is Little John, and then it gets a bit more obscure. We have
Friar Bernard,
who's
Friar Tuck, okay.
And Terry, who's Will Scarlet or something.
He's called Terry because he's a terrier, I think, but not got much to do with Robin Hood. But anyway.
And that storyline has a lot of potential as well, actually. It's got the evil Baron and Viscount being the grasping French upper classes. So it's
quite low down upper classes.
Quite low down upper classes. Vying for power, thinking they can get it from Blanc-Bac. Well, they don't really get it from the king. So that's an interesting bit of social commentary as well. Dogtanian's teaming up with Peregrine Hood and putting himself on the wrong side of the law in some ways, and things get very complicated.
Yeah, and Widdamer's there with the Cardinal's Guard.
On behalf of the king.
Assuming that Peregrine Hood is in the wrong.
Yeah. So, again, potentially, great story. Practically, it falls rather short. Pip does really save the day in that one, because he goes off and finds Dogtanian when he's been arrested, and everybody else just sits around doing bugger all.
They think they've sent Pip to find out what's happened, but actually all they've done is decided to send Pip to find out what's happened, and he's already doing it.
He's done it of his own accord.
And they're sitting there, it's like they're waiting for him to come back. They're going, oh, where's Pip? He's been ages. We sent him off to find out what happened, didn't we? No, you didn't.
I love Bougeot in that one, telling off the guard who's going to sleep while guarding Dogtanian. Catching up on our sleep, worry? Ha, stupid! That's just Bougeot lifting the show, as he always does, or usually does when he's around. There's a bit in that, isn't there, that has a terrible problem in the animation, where the Muskehounds, the 4 Muskehounds, and Peregrine Hood's men...
The 3.
Yes, because Dogtanian's in a cage, you're quite right. Are supposed to be fighting off a huge number of the Baron and Viscount's men, the tax collectors, which is the standard brown-clothed character model that you'll see in a lot of places over the series, and Blancbac's green-clothed followers, who are his kind of revolutionary force, and Widmer and the Cardinal's guards, who are there on behalf of the king. So it's supposed to be these 3 quite vast armies all teaming up against the 3 Muskehounds and Peregrine Hood and his men. But they haven't drawn in enough of Peregrine Hood's men. They've only drawn in the 4 that we mentioned. So it looks like 7 people fighting an army of about 50 or something. And that really doesn't work, does it?
No, and it would have been so cool
wouldn't it?
When Dogtanian persuades Widmer that he's fighting on the wrong side, and Widmer goes, "Attention, men, we're fighting on the side of the King's Muskehound."
That is a great moment for Widmer, actually, coming through, doing the right thing, realising that Dogtanian isn't his enemy at all there. And that's supposed to turn the tide, the Cardinal's guards joining the Muskehounds and the Peregrine Hood men to defeat the tax collectors and Blancbac's followers. And we should be able to see that reflected in the animation, and as you say, it would be so cool, and it would make it an even cooler moment for Widmer. But we just don't see it because there's been some sort of breakdown in how they've actually drawn it.
Damn storyboarders.
Yeah, so again, it's potential, isn't it? All the potential is there, but the actual process of bringing it to life has fallen extremely short, which is rather disappointing.
Of course, Pip lets Dogtanian out of his cage, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. Can you get hold of the key? What's the next arc? It must be the Black Rose, which again has a nice bit of social history in there, because Princess Dalma is a very rich, very bored, very bratty sort of young princess character who becomes this dashing highwayman robber sort of thing, Black Rose Bandit, because she's bored and she can't really think of anything else to do.
And she doesn't appreciate that not everyone's as rich as her.
Yeah, so... And then at the end of the arc, she'll mend her ways and perhaps realise the problems with the world that have caused her to think like this.
And of course, we're not supposed to know that the Black Rose Bandit is Princess Dalma, but it's pretty obvious, isn't it?
It's pretty obvious all the way through, yes.
Because they're the only Dalmatians, for instance.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it, when the king's saying he's looking forward to seeing the Queen and Princess Dalma together. It's really stunning.
Really pervy.
Really pervy. But again, a story arc with plenty of potential that isn't fully realised. And then the final story arc, which is my favourite, because it is such a coherent sequel to the first series with Milady, is the kidnapping of Dogtanian's Fleur. Dogtanian and Juliet have 2 children, Philippe and Fleur, and they always call Fleur Flore, so we used to say it was funny that instead of kidnapping Dogtanian's daughter, Milady was going to kidnap Dogtanian's Fleur, which of course would be very inconvenient for him.
Juliet and the narrator are quite good at saying Fleur.
Yes, they are. Fleur, most people come out with, and sometimes just Fleur.
And that's why they call the fleur-de-lis a fleur-de-lis.
Yeah. But yes, that's another thing they get wrong. The symbol of Blanc and his revolutionary force is supposed to be the flaming fleur-de-lis, so it's burning the royal crest.
They draw it correctly.
But they always just call it the fleur-de-lis rather than a flaming fleur-de-lis. And at the beginning of the kidnapping Fleur story arc, you get quite a nice exchange between Milady and Bougeot, don't you? A kind of their mission statement. Bougeot's the password he asks for.
He's in this confessional, pretending to be a priest.
It's very imagery-filled, that, isn't it?
And the password and countersign are, the fleur-de-lis is going to ruin.
And only the flames, or the glorious flames of revolution can
bring it back to life.
I mean, that is actually quite interesting and deep, much deeper than the series actually goes. And we know that the glorious flames of revolution are not far from France in real life. Long live our dear France, says the king. I say, nah, not in the way you mean. But that is quite interesting. Blanc isn't doing it for any laudable reason, of course. He just wants to be king himself.
They're going to say to the musketeers, if you interfere with our plans, we're going to kill your floor.
Yes, which of course Dogtanian doesn't like.
But what they do better to do is kidnap someone Pip cares about.
Yes, but it's actually quite quick, the floor story arc. The first episode of it, which has that bit we were just talking about with the password and countersign, is actually very good.
Apart from the bit with the ants.
Which is a terrible waste of time, Philippe and his honey and the ants. But I like Philippe, actually. I think he's quite well pulled off as a character. I think he has a lot of unrealised potential, and I do think the Coramon voice from Digimon is very good for it. But it's very good in that episode when Milady turns up and starts being very sinister and talking to Fleur and coaxing her and tricking her and taking her into the carriage. And it's kind of a rehashed version, I'm sure quite deliberately, of Milady coaxing Juliet into her carriage 10 years earlier.
More homage than rehash. Perhaps.
Yes, more homage. Yes, rehash makes it sound a bit negative, doesn't it? But no, it's homage, that's right. Again, at that point in the first series, Milady was coaxing in Juliet with promises of good things to come, save her, look after her, but actually wanted to kidnap her, and it ended up with Juliet falling off a cliff into a river, that scene. And
exciting, cool things like that don't really happen in series 2.
No, not really, just in that one episode we were talking about with the bridge burning up. And then 10 years later, Milady does the same thing to Fleur, coaxes her into the carriage with promises of flowers to feed her ladybug, and is actually all the time kidnapping her for evil Blanc. It's quite effective, that.
And the sinister music, I think, works well.
It does work well there. It's perhaps the best kind of atmosphere you managed to get in the second series in terms of being sinister, chilling, and Milady's a good character to do that with. But unlike in the first series, Milady doesn't stay ruthless and efficient after kidnapping Fleur like she did with Juliet, and she ends up coming through and rescuing Fleur in a way, and realising that Blanc and Bougeot aren't to be trusted. She has a very good line, doesn't she, to Bougeot in that scene we were talking about that we like. Richelieu has grown soft over the years. And she's right, Richelieu has grown soft over the years. He spends the entire second series trying to find out what's going on and never actually finding out what's going on until someone comes and tells him at the very end. Milady actually comes and fills him in at the very end about everything that's been going on. And Richelieu will then come through as a force for good, in a way.
So when Fleur has been kidnapped, what do the Muskehounds do? They go and have a go at the Cardinal, and then they go home.
Which is quite a good scene, actually, where the Cardinal actually talks to them about it. I know we've been rivals for years, but I wouldn't do this. And they're like, yeah, we know you wouldn't. You tried to poison Dogtanian, but you wouldn't do this.
Yes, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, he's grown soft.
Yes, then they go home, then they ride off in a random direction claiming to look for Fleur. They say, oh, let's stop and have some lunch. They stop at this inn and they happen to find the driver who's been driving Milady and Fleur around, and they try and bully information out of him with their swords. Aramis tries to coax it out of him pleasantly, and meanwhile Pip's off chasing his wig. It's a sort of judge's wig, which he acquires for the second series, and it's very weird.
Pip's wig, ugh.
It flies off into this hollow tree. It sort of bounces like it's sentient or something. It's really weird. But anyway, he goes into this hollow tree to retrieve his wig and hears voices right near where this driver says that he's dropped off a lady and a young girl under mysterious circumstances. He comes to tell them that he's heard voices in the hollow tree, and how do the Muskehounds react?
They laugh at him.
They say, Pip, you're so crazy. There's no hollow tree with voices in it.
They've just been told that Milady and Fleur are somewhere in the local vicinity, probably hiding out. Pip said he's found the hollow tree where they're hiding, and they just laugh at him. But again, he's solved the entire thing.
If they just went and got Fleur out of the hollow tree with only Milady to try and stop 4 skilled soldiers, they could have just been done with it.
Yeah, and her heart wasn't even in it by then anyway. She was kind of trying to rescue Fleur herself, or stop Blanc doing anything else to her. It's when Blanc wants her to write a note in Fleur's blood that Milady realises, oh dear, I'm not quite happy with this.
Yeah, so I thought at that point she may have resisted them a little, but she couldn't have done much against the Muskehounds.
So again, not all the potential of that story arc is reached, but I think perhaps it comes the closest of any arc in the second series.
And what happens at the end of that story arc? Blanc's going to shoot everyone with his gun, and then suddenly Pip appears with his gun, which is about the same size as him.
And Blanc and Bouchot realise they're beaten and just give up at once.
Where's Pip been hiding his gun all this time?
Pip's been hiding this gun all this time. Hands up, gentlemen. Oh, we're beaten by Pip. Well, it had to happen, didn't it?
And then everyone laughs at Pip and says, oh, you didn't do anything, did you, Pip?
Yes, so, with a bit of a rewrite and a more skillful bit of voice work, the second series could be a very good follow-up to the first, really. But as it stands, it's extremely inadequate.
You know what we do like in that last part of the Fleur arc? We like Bouchot threatening to stab Fleur through the eye.
Yes.
And meaning it.
You know he'll do it.
Think I won't harm her? No, I don't think
No, we're thinking we know you will, Bouchot. Dogtanian's presented there as very sort of powerless. Put down the knife now. I grow impatient, and Bouchot's like, look, you know I'm going to stab your daughter in the head, so don't pretend you don't think it, because we all know he would.
What a shame it's not Cam Clark.
Yes, Cam Clark doing Dogtanian, 10 years older, would actually allow the series to reach a lot more of its potential than it does, I'm sure, even with all the other voices as they are. The final episode of the second series is rather like the final episode of the first series. You get a sort of party, and Dogtanian's victorious, and everyone comes to wish him well, and so on. And I do like the closing bit of narration in that final episode of the second series. They will forever live in our memories as Dogtanian and the Three Muskehounds. And he's right! They will! I can't think of Musketeers, Dogtanian, without visualising them all as dogs.
If you're of the generation watching the cartoon, then yes, they will live on in your hearts in that way.
Dogtanian and the Three Muskehounds. There's no two ways about it. Even if you read through the original Dumas stuff, you'll be visualising them as dogs. I certainly do. As we touched on earlier, we had most of Series 2 on video from its original showing for a long time, and that's why we know it from the Duke of Bavaria storyline quite well. As Rosie has often said to me, we didn't really used to realise that the first series was so much better, and was so different, and was so much deeper. But when we started getting the videos and later DVDs when they first came out in 2003, we really started to realise, well, that's some quality stuff, proper Dogtanian.
They released them with sort of gaps in time. You had to wait quite a few weeks for the next one, and it was an agonising wait.
Annoyingly long few months gaps between the releases there were, and they chose quite carefully what episodes were going to be in each release, so we had a kind of cliffhanger. The first release of the first series ends with Juliet kidnapped in the house, and Dogtanian at a loss, and Rochefort gloating gleefully, and you're never not going to buy the next video after that, are you?
They know how to make us spend our money.
They do.
But they didn't do that with the second series. It was just all in one big box set.
Oh yeah, they never released that sporadically. But then, would we have wanted to come back having watched the cliffhangers? Who knows?
We would have just forgotten all about it between releases.
Yes, I mean, the second series release is like, well, you've got the first series, you might as well have this as well. Which is very much what we thought. And we were very interested to see the episodes we didn't have on video and see if the first half of the series was up to the standard of the bridge blowing up episode, which we thought it might be. But actually it wasn't.
It wasn't even up to the standard of the not quite so good episodes.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. So there we are, Dogtanian and the Three Muskehounds, as they will live forever in our memories, and perhaps yours as well.
Next time, we'll be talking about The Adventures of Sinbad, which is not a huge, massive favourite of mine, but I do want to talk about it, and I want to do it soon because both of us have watched it recently enough to remember it quite well.
Yes, well worth a talk about while we remember what happened on it pretty much and what we want to say. So we hope you'll join us for that. But until then, there's nothing else to say except good night out there.
Whatever you are.